Hi, my name is Benny. I am the co-founder CEO of Future Primitive. It's a creative studio building experimental token communities. Currently, we work with a bunch of streetwear brands like BB3 and Jeff Staple on Stapleverse. And what we like to do is explore the convergence of culture and Web3 and crypto. So that's a little bit about what we do here at Future Primitive.
What's up? I'm Greg Loxton. I'm the creative director of BB3. Come from a background working with Billionaire Boys Club on kind of a traditional photography and clothing background and design background, and eventually found my way into Web3 and helped kind of start Billionaire Boys Club as a brand, start our Web3 venture, which is called BB3. I think like if we look 50 years in the future and look at what we're doing, I want to see kind of creatives ruling the world, right? And I think it's really cool kind of like with what we're doing and the traditional sense of businesses in the corporate space where creatives are very much kind of undervalued, right? And I think that's something that's with the Web3 ethos and even kind of rewriting the smart contract changes this narrative a lot, right? And I think we get to be a part of that, right? Like as a brand, BB3 engaging with an artist, we get to kind of rewrite this traditional one-way contractual arrangement, right? Where you get into a contract with an artist, they give you that artwork that they wanted, right? And they hand it off to you and they get their money and they wash their hands of it, right? And I think that you see this in the way that we work, even with a smart contract, is that now they get royalty and they get equity so that, you know, once they deliver an asset or a piece of art, they're also thinking about that secondary royalty that they might get. So increasing the value of it in the long term, staying committed to a project and continuing in conversations with the brand, I think is a really cool dynamic that allows creatives like myself and artists that maybe don't have a corporate background to start to get into that world. And for me, that's what allows them to start to like get the kind of flowers that they deserve, right? Because if you think about like their contribution to some corporate brands, they're the ones that have a pulse on the culture. What's interesting is that a lot of these brands try to keep up with the culture and stay up with trends, but creators are the ones that kind of create these trends, and they're always on pace with these things. So, you know, with the pace that Web3 moves and technology and culture and society, it just feels like creatives are the ones that are always on top of that. So, yeah, I want to see creatives rule the world. Yeah.
That's awesome.
What about you, man?
That's great. I mean, 50 years, I'll be in Mars. I mean, if Elon or whoever succeeds, we'll be starting a new colony on Mars.
I hope
so. But you know, more on moving back to planet Earth. I mean, what we're really talking about, there's like two things, right? One is about human relationships, and I think you talked about how human relationships and the roles and how creativity is going to evolve tremendously in these next 50 years. I mean, if we rewind 50 years from here to the past 1970-ish, I mean, the internet was still, that's when the internet was still being worked on, right? It was the early days, and I think if we were in 1970s and we were like, oh, what would 2022 look like? Yeah. We wouldn't have been able to imagine all the things that are possible.
Exactly.
So I think 50 years from now, I agree with your point. Human relationships, creativity, the creatives are gonna, be empowered, and the blending between an entrepreneur, a creative, an artist, a designer is all going to be mixed in.
Exactly, yeah.
All of it will just be like human creativity that can generate value across the world, right?
Right.
The second thing is, especially in our world, in the Web3 side, we're dealing with digital things, right? So in this world, there's a heavy emphasis on production of physical goods, and that could be cars, that could be shipping containers, that could be clothing, that could be anything, right? And in 50 years' time, I'm really hoping, I mean, we really have to, because of the climate issues, really focus on it and address, digital things are going to be better for the planet. And if right now we have a problem of trying to make digital things have the same amount of weight or value or storytelling, and I'm sure we'll get there within those 50 years, we'll be able to kind of encapsulate memory, encapsulate stories, and we could rewind back time through the blockchain.
Right.
And I think that will actually make digital goods even better than buying a physical good. And I hope that will help with the climate change issues that we have right now in 2022.
Yeah, we've got a long way to go too. I think it's like there's still like a long, even like cognitive evolution that I think we need to make as a society about like applying value to a digital object or a digital kind of asset. But that's such a cool and interesting point that like these things down the road, if you really think about it and how we value digital assets, like will be more valuable than even the physical, which is really interesting. And also like how it affects climate change and the conversations about, you know, crypto mining being bad for the environment. And I think there's a lot of conversations that we can have that are actually pro-environment that Web3 supports. So I think that's really cool too. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I've been at BBC for 8-ish years now. And maybe 3 or 4 years in, my older brother is kind of like my role model, big overachiever, Amazon executive, this and that. He, you know, I was coming to a point where I wasn't really sure what was kind of next in my career. I'd been at BBC for a few years and wasn't really sure like what my identity was as a creative, I guess. And he always gave me this advice that was like, you know, when you feel like you've hit a ceiling with a company or in a role or with a team, like you got to identify that, be proactive about it, and make the move, right? And identify what that next step is for you, because that's what he says is the key to exponential growth in your career, right? And when you think about it, like it's all logical and it makes sense, but there was a part of me at BBC that was like, I still have more to do and more to learn. And I think sometimes like you think you reach a ceiling, but you just have this gut feeling that you're going to break through it right there. And that's really what I felt like, you know, being at BBC is in itself such a blessing. Being in a company that is kind of like under the vision of Pharrell is the blessing as well. And just the way that his kind of like persona and his ability to do good and be creative and be a multi-talented artist kind of just seeped through all his different businesses and the people that he lets run his businesses. So on that front, I was like, I felt like there was more I had to do. And I stuck around, and I would have never guessed that what it would have been is Web3 and doing this BB3 thing with you, but that's what happened. I think these things just happen for a reason. And I guess really the lesson is like, sometimes you get good advice from people you trust, but sometimes you got to trust yourself a little more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I echo that. I think that at the end of the day, you know you yourself, right?
Yeah.
And like I think through our lives, especially we're both fairly young, like in our 20s, and you know, right out of school, we're just like, oh, what do we do? You know, we chase all these things. We go to school because of our parents, and then we usually what happens is your first career, you become an investment banker or something, and you're like, you know what, that's not actually what I want, right? And later on you find out like, oh, you know what, I want to chase my passions. And
exactly.
I think for you, like, you've stuck around for 8 years. That's a very long stint, you know, in comparison to the Gen Zs or the Gen Xs. Like, that's a very long stint at the company. But I felt like you've achieved so much. You've learned so much. You know the ins and outs of the business, and now you have the opportunity for building the future of it, right?
Yeah,
the future of commerce, the future of storytelling, the future of brands.
Definitely.
Right? So that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, my story, I mean, in a similar vein, so I've been I started here in Vancouver at a venture studio called Axiom Zen. and I started out as a social media intern, and it's just trying to get my foot in the door and join this really cool company that was experimenting with AR, VR, AI, machine learning, SaaS businesses. And I was like, wow, this is like awesome, you know. So I joined and just learned a lot about startups and launching products, and then got the chance to, you know, launch CryptoKitties and form Dapper Labs, and then even work on NBA Top Shot. And you know, from the time I joined, I was employee 13, and now there's like 650 people. And I think the latest valuation in the company is like, I think 7 to 8 billion or something. So, you know, this is actually quite recent. Well, last year in November, I was in a crossroads. I've been in Axiom Zen Dapper Labs for about 6 years, and I think we started to arrive at certain situations where it was like, I got advice from, you know, my friends at the company who are higher up, and they're like, you know what, you should stick around. You should stick around for 3 more years, and you can continue vesting the equity and the tokens. I think that, I mean, current value was like 4 mil or something like that. And that was such a mentally destabilizing thought,
Yeah.
right? It was like
Right.
3 more years of my life, and yes, it's a lot of capital, but I wasn't happy. You
Right.
know? I just felt like my creativity and my ideas, now that it's a 600-person company, were no longer, you know, impactful and relevant, and that now we're a machine. We're less of a cooperative, less of a studio or a startup mindset.
Yeah.
And I made the decision to walk away from that amount of money, and decided, you know what, what's more important is to chase the things that I deeply believe in, which is culture and Web3 and crypto. Having the chance to meet you and work with you on BB3, that gives me a lot more energy waking up in the morning than sitting there every day and just like counting the days for 3 years for the vesting. So, you know, that was one advice that I was receiving from internally, but I went against it, and I was like, you know, now I feel much happier a year later.
Yeah.
So.
And that's awesome. I think that it takes a lot of courage to walk away from something like that that's going really well. And you really built that from the ground up, right? Some of those early projects and Dapper Labs was really you co-founding it. So to walk away from that and really kind of trust your gut, like I was saying, is like really, really courageous. And especially what's awesome in Web3 is it allows for people to kind of do things like this. You know, like you don't need that multi-million-dollar valuation to go run your own Web3 project or Web3 company. So obviously you had, you know, the Rolodex and the experience, but really that's to say that like anyone, if they really have the passion to want to go do it in Web3, like it's all there for you to take. You know what I mean?
I mean, now is the time, really.
Exactly.
Like, I just see that there's so much opportunity, so much to be built.
Yeah.
That, you know, like if you really focus in and you do great work, you do great storytelling, work with the right people, you'll find success in this area.
Yep. It's tough. It's a tough question. The first thing I honestly think of, and this is really just my mindset, is I don't like to go and think about what ifs, right? I firmly believe that like things happen for a reason, and even though we have this choice and you know we get to make our own decisions, I think we make the decisions that we're kind of meant to make at the end of the day. And so in that sense, I think interruptions are necessary in our life, right? And they kind of get us to where we need to be, whether we realize it or not, right? I think back, and this might be a bomb, and I don't even know if I've told you this, but maybe 3 years ago I was diagnosed with cancer.
Wow.
And maybe it took me like you know, a year to kind of get over. And even now, like I look back at that, and I'm an optimistic dude, so it might be tough to kind of say this to the general public, but like I look back at that and I'm like, Well, before that, I was on this path of like being this designer and like trying to be in the streetwear and fashion world, and like it definitely slowed me down. There was a moment where I was like, man, like now I feel like my peers are getting a head start on me and they're getting ahead of me, and I'm like behind because, you know, I was sick for a year and BBC took care of me, but I was, you know, for really at the end of the day, I was kind of like set back because you deal with this stuff for a year and it takes a toll on you. But then fast forward a couple years later, I'm here now where I really think I was meant to be. And even when I think back at like me wanting to be in the streetwear world, like this is more fulfilling to me. And so even with that huge interruption and life change, I feel like maybe without that, like this sequence of events wouldn't have happened, where like the timing of Web3 and like things popping off at the right time, and you know, like even just like the sequence of us and the genesis of us meeting through Overtime, right? Doing that collaboration at that certain time, which got us in touch with you, which, you know, I think just things happen for a reason. And so not to like drop a bomb of like sadness into it, but like things like that even can be like set your life on a different path for the better, you know? So maybe that like skirts the question, but I don't like to think about like if I didn't have interruption. I really think like even if I didn't have interruption, like I would still kind of be me, you know? I don't let things kind of change my pace, move at my own speed, and I think that's always kind of been my vibe. So yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, thanks for sharing. I've never heard that story before.
Yeah, I know. I feel like we've been working together for a while. Because it's not something like I want to just. I'm open about it. I don't care. Like I'm proud about it. But it's not something I want to just like drop in conversation to people. But yeah, like I think it's important for people to know that like you might hit these snags that like, and it might not even be about you. Like it might be sickness that's
something you can't control,
out of your control, and you kind of, you know, you roll with the punches and you make do with what you get and come out better for it, right? So
I mean, like I think you've already had your interruption. Now every day that you have going on is like, you know,
it's
amazing,
a gift, man.
right?
Yeah,
like
that's what I'm saying.
it's a blessing. Every day on forward from the interruption,
exactly.
You're living the best life you can, right? So I don't know how to follow up with you.
No, man.
I mean, I'll answer it, but you know, I feel like my uninterrupted self is, you know, this idea of aligning the ideas I have in my head and having that executed. And so, you know, for a lot of my life, I've been very curious about the human condition and empathy, and I love film. I love watching film. I love talking about film. And I think film, you know, sometimes they call it the empathy machine. It makes you cry, makes you angry, you know, makes you feel things. And I think that, you know, for me, at a certain point, like filmmaking or in that realm of storytelling, and that's why we gravitate a lot towards like what is the BB3 story and why is it so important to have a narrative and a lore, because there are a lot of brands out there, and they're brand by the fact that they've been around for a long time and they have symbols that are highly recognizable, right? Like the swoosh or whatnot. But what gets lost in the translation is the story. It could be the founder's story. It could be the imaginative story that you know, is associated with it. But for us, I think, you know, I now, you know, the uninterrupted self is focusing on telling the stories of the people, and then going back to Web3, like creating millions of jobs for creative people. And number 3 is thinking about the planet and how we could kind of unify and you know, talk about some of the most challenging things about value and climate and what does it mean for us to live in different countries but work together nicely, you know. So those are the things that I would think about, and if I was able to unify them all under Web3, that would be amazing.
And I've always like loved that about you, is like your ability to build a brand with storytelling. Like I think that takes, and I always call this to other people, call you this to other people, but I call you our like mad scientist, right? Because like not even just the storytelling, but the way that you understand the tech, and even just like the greater landscape of what Web3 can do for us as a society is like been super inspiring to me to watch you do. So like the question is like, what would you do uninterrupted? Well, you're already doing that, which is really, really cool. Like you're at the forefront of all this stuff. And you know, I thought it was super cool when you were telling me about that conference you went to with kind of these Canadian political leaders, and interesting because I was like, that's weird. Why would Benny be going to a political conference? And the way you put it, where it's like, well, we live in this Web3 bubble, where like obviously everyone in Web3 and Web3 adjacent kind of understands what's going on, but there's all these kind of PMs and, you know, political leaders that maybe don't really understand and need to hear from someone like you to maybe be convinced or even put on the path to be convinced. And it's like really, really important work that I don't think people really quite have visibility on or understand. So I definitely want to like give you kudos for that, because like builders do this and they make brands and they do really cool things, but like you're really evangelizing like the space to the rest of the world, which is just so important. So
well, thank you so much,
props,
Greg.
man. Yeah,
We're gonna do it together.
yes sir.
So I'd like to zoom out of this, zoom out and kind of, I really like to think about technology in the forms of how it impacted humanity, right? So in my mind, there's like 8 technological innovations that have really like pushed us forward. The first thing is the invention of the silicon chip, which is like using metal and putting it on a board and like, hey, these things kind of work, right? And then the second thing is the invention of the computer, which, you know, started off as big as this room that we're in right now, but then became small, right? And the computer put all those silicon chips into work so we could see something, we can do some type of work, right? The third thing is the invention of the internet. So now we're able to connect all the computers together, dial up internet, DSL, you know, and we could do MSN Messenger, ICQ, all that type of cool stuff. And then the fourth thing is the creation of mobile apps, right? And mobile apps changed the way that we function. We could click a button, order an Uber, and a car comes picks you up. Click of a button, you could rent someone's home for Airbnb. The fifth thing, actually reverse the order, but the fifth thing is the invention of the phones, mobile phones, right? Where we went from the old school kind of Nokias all the way to iPhones. That was fully touchscreen. And then the sixth thing is AI, machine learning. So now that we have computers, internet, mobile apps, and phones, we have a lot of data everywhere, right? And your phone's generating data, the Wi-Fi is generating data. You need AI machine learning to make sense of all of it, to compute it down into something that could be an insight, right? Or you could generate art with it, right? As we've seen. And the seventh thing is the blockchain. The blockchain comes in where it looks at everything that's being generated, the data that's on the internet, and digital images, digital video, music, everything, and prescribes and gives a protocol level way of thinking about value. And that hasn't existed since, but now it does, and it's slowly picking up. And the eighth thing, at least for now, is quantum computers. Quantum computers is going back to the hardware, which is where we started with silicon chips, but now it's going into this whole new world of qubits, and where processing is going to be 1,000,000 times faster. We don't even know where that's going to take us, but that's already going to really change the way humanity works. So I like to look at those 8 types of technologies that impact us, and as it relates to Web3, we zoom into number 7, right? And where we talk about what is Web3. So Web3 has 3 stages. The reason why it's called Web3, Web 1 was like AOL and like very basic like Netscape. It's more of a, you get to go on the computer and read articles, right? Web 2 is the blogging era, or the Twitters, the Facebooks, where you can read articles and you can write, you can tweet, you can post. Now you have a read and write permission, right? Web 3 is read, write, and own. So now you could read articles, write articles, and now I could even own an article or own a digital image, right? And so Web3 is a model that's inside of the broader blockchain spectrum, and that's kind of how I envision like how technology and how, you know, the space that we play in.
Yeah, I love that. That's probably the most clear description of Web 1, 2, and 3 I've ever received. Because you know, when I first got into it, I was like, what is Web 3? And like trying to really understand like that whole kind of concept of read, write, own that's the best way to put it. Because really like what we're doing is like changing the dynamics of asset ownership, right? Having the things you own directly impact the experiences that you have in your life and that you have access to. I think that's really cool because, you know, you own a Nike sneaker and, you know, you might not really get any tailored experiences for it, you know, besides, you know, seeing other people on the street and, you know, liking their sneakers. But with Web3, you have these experiences that you can unlock in the real world just by your ownership of certain assets, right? And I think that's really cool because we can really start to customize our lives and have these day-to-day experiences that are tailored for us and made for us based on the things that we own. Whereas before, there's no way to really say like, he's a fan of this and she's a fan of that, and get them to interact with the experiences you want to give them. So it just gives us a much more kind of direct tie to who our community is and allow them to really get deep into our brand and what we're trying to offer them. So yeah, I think that's super cool.
At the end of the day, that comes down to human connections, right?
Exactly.
You look at, and I'll use this another model for you. Like, you know, Google created the search graph, right? So everything that you search around the world, or anyone anywhere searching things, it creates a graph of what are the interests that people have,
right?
And then you have Facebook coming in with like a social graph, which is like, Greg is friends with 5 people. These 5 people are common friends of this person, so they start to stitch together a map.
Right.
That's why it knows that you have like a high school friend, and it's like, hey, this is your friend, right? So they created a social graph. And the third graph that we're starting to see, and it's still early, is like a token graph, right?
Exactly.
Where it's about everyone is represented by a wallet, and you start to own many digital things, like digital shoes, digital shirts, you know, Bored Apes or whatever, you know, and those things start to create a whole new map that is not about your high school friend. It's not about what you search on Google. It's about the digital things that you own. And when you have that whole map created, you actually could make friends from all around the world that you never knew that like Google or Facebook would have pointed you towards, right? And so that to me is really fascinating.
That's
it's,
so
it's
cool.
all about relationships at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. It really comes down to like putting more value on your community and really letting them be the ones to drive the show. I think we always talk about in streetwear and how Web3 changes streetwear and how brands interact with their consumers. You look at back in the day, if someone wears a t-shirt, right, they're like a walking billboard for you. Right? And now if you own an NFT from a brand, you're a walking billboard for them, but now you also get some asset out of it. You get some equity in the brand. We always talk about this guy on Instagram. His name is King of Creams. He goes by King of Creams. And he's one of the biggest collectors of ice cream, OG ice cream footwear. And he understands the history of everything and has an Instagram that kind of promotes all of our shoes because he has a passion for it and he loves it. You know, there's no relationship where we give him marketing dollars to do that. He does that because he wants to do that. And conversely, if he wants to kind of hype these sneakers up and go and sell them and make a few bucks off of them, he can do that, right? And those are two things that happen completely independent of each other. when it should be this synergistic relationship between the brand and consumer, right? Like he's doing free marketing for us, and we get nothing off of his resale of the shoe. Web3 changes this completely, where it's like now you and your consumer or community are kind of tied together in this mutual relationship where it's like you have responsibility to each other. And most of all, you as a brand and a project owner and a founder have responsibility to your community to show up for them, right? Like you're held accountable, and I think accountability is really key. Because if you look at like how brands and corporations conduct themselves now, it's like people don't have to be accountable for anything that they do. And so now when really like you answer to your community and they're the ones that, you know, dictate the success or failure of your project, you have no choice but to really stay true to them and really give them what they want and be accountable for that. So it's a really cool dynamic change that I think was even a bit of a learning curve for me coming from, you know, one of those big brands who felt like I could prescribe you anything and you would buy it, right? And Web3 is different, where you can't just go in and act like you're the big gun in the room and people are gonna get with you, right? You have to come in correct and genuine and understand the space. Otherwise, we've seen tons of brands that try to get into Web3 for the wrong reasons and in the wrong way, and the space shuts them down. And I think that's really cool, that it's not just like because you have this backing from a brand, that's it. That's all you have to do. Like you really got to put in the effort and the time to get it right. And it's cool to have to do that.
Like a brand almost becomes a steward, right?
Yes.
And it's like a network. And
exactly.
The way I usually think about it is like, you know, Uber drivers or Airbnb hosts, they are the product, right? They're the ones driving their car around the city, and yes, they do make money from it. But the problem is that it wouldn't be better if they earned Uber equity, or the more they kind of participated in the network, not only are they getting paid, but their voice is actually taken into account, right? And you know, we've already seen a lot of issues of this dynamic of like the tech company building, it's called network effects, building a network, and then having people like hosts and drivers do the work using the app, and the company takes a huge cut, has the branding and has the distribution, but the drivers and the hosts are usually left holding the bag, right?
Exactly.
They're the ones that have to work 14-hour days, they don't get breaks, there's surge pricing, all these problems, right? And I think it's like what we're trying to do here is to equalize that, right? And make the voice of the people who are participating in the network, like King of Creams, to like, hey, have a voice on the new collection of BBC's vintage sneakers, right?
Exactly.
And not just him, but thousands of others BBC fans involved in that process.
That's so cool. Like imagine if you had all your stakeholders were your fans, and not just people that wanted to make money off your brand. Like that's what's happening here. We're like, the people who are part of your brand and funding you are your fans, are the people that want the best for your brand. And so for them to get involved in what you do and make decisions, I think it can only be good for the health of a brand and a community. So
absolutely.
Super cool. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I mean, like big brands these days, like I think they see Web3 or NFTs or crypto as like a press strategy. It's like a line item under marketing, where it's like, hey, let's get those headlines, let's be the cool thing. You know, the way I kind of, when I look at new projects is remove the NFT, all that stuff. What is the actual nexus of the idea? You know, what is the core? Is it and you know what I like to do is I just like to ask why, many times. So when I meet a project that's doing an NFT drop or a brand, and they're like, hey, we want to do this, I'm like, why? And then why? And then why? And see how far they can kind of make it down this pipeline. Because in the first few whys, they're going to give you the typical answer, right? Like, oh, this is a new way for fan engagement, or oh, we can make more money. We can make more money on this, or oh, we want to be known as the coolest thing, right? And then why? And then you could kind of assess the core nature of, you know, why are they doing this. So that's what I like to do. Sometimes people don't like it, but it is true. And then, like you said, the team, are they dogs? What's the reputation? That's also key. And I like to, for me, I have a very different lens on NFTs. I've had a chance to launch CryptoKitties and Cheese Wizards and NBA Top Shot. They're dramatically different. CryptoKitties was us in a room and we were kind of playing around and like, this is kind of like a prank and we think it's funny, and we launched it, right? NBA Top Shot took thousands of hours of user research of sneakerheads, basketball card collectors, and basketball fans. Like, hey, what do you think? What do you think? And both have their own strengths and weaknesses. But I think a core NFT idea, whenever we talk to brands and all that, is like, are they spending the time to investigate the actual behaviors of the users, right? A lot of times NFTs, it's kind of like following the next person in line. 10,000, okay, that's the way it is, right? And the PFPs, they look like this, and that's how it should be. And sure, some people have found success in that, but to me, that's not pushing forward the technology, and it shows a lack of people doing homework and investigation. Because NFT at the end of the day, it's like a few lines of text that lives on a ledger, on a blockchain, right? Everything else is for your interpretation. And it's kind of like, if I was to use a fashion analogy, right? At the end of the day, most clothing is like cotton or whatever. And it's like, imagine that you gave everyone cotton and they all designed the same pants, because that's like how it is, right? But I mean, you could do anything with cotton. You could be very creative in the stitching and the threading. Like, why don't you be creative, right? Why make the same pair of pants that other people are doing, even though the material is the same, right? So that's kind of how I would analyze or think about an NFT project.
And I love that. I've noticed that even just like within how we work and like how you analyze some of the decisions and things that like I present or we present as a brand, you always like a devil's advocate, right, in the best way, because sometimes you need to keep questioning these things that you think are shoo-ins in order to get it to the next level. And also questioning like the status quo, right, in a space that's moving so quickly, being able to be flexible and iterate and understand that like, there's a lot of creative ideas that haven't been executed yet in Web3. And instead of kind of like going with what's been successful in the past, you have this opportunity to explore all of these untapped ideas. Whereas all these like kind of traditional mediums, like even streetwear, it's like everything's been done and remixed multiple times by now. You know what I mean? Like, these brands have been around for a long time. Streetwear, even these new brands are, ripping off old brands, right? Ripping off vintage logos, things like that. So not to take away from that, but I think like what's really fun and cool in Web3 that we're bringing up now is that like the ability to be creative and come up with newness is kind of endless, because it's such a new space. And that's really, really fun to find an opportunity to like unbound yourself from like the prescriptions of the space. Like you said, like a 10K collection, like, do we need to do that? Or like a PFP collection, do we need to do that? It's like questioning these things is so important. And that's why, again, like I think it's good to get a pulse on who the founders are and how they're thinking. If they're showing up in spaces, if they're, they're talking to the public about how they're thinking about things, that gives me a lot of confidence just to see the mindset that people have when they approach the space. That's like imperative to kind of evaluating a team and a project.
Absolutely. In the startup space, there's been a proven model, the business model canvas, the lean startup. I mean, that's kind of like the Bibles that I read. The core of those models is focusing on a user and a problem, right? What is the problems you're trying to solve? And you come up with hypothesis, and you go and verify, de-risk these problems, these challenges, and then you might arrive at something really cool, right? I think for founders who are trying to pitch NFT projects, a lot of times they're shoehorning a problem that does not actually fully exist, or prescribing one, as we said, that is very blanket, and that masks the actual true reasons why why it should exist, right? And I'll give you an example. I mean, NBA Top Shot. For the very long time, when we were doing those thousands of hours of research, people were like, "Why would I pay for highlight footage?
Right.
I watch it on House of Highlights, and it's free, and I watch it on YouTube. Like, why? And then there was also the basketball card collectors who were like, "Hey, how come I'm buying all these boxes of cards and I open them?" And then I find a cool card, and then I have to wear white gloves and put it in the case,
Yeah.
and then I got to ship it to PSA to get it graded,
Yeah.
and then that takes weeks and money, and come back, and now I have it graded, and then I got to list that on eBay, and so this whole process takes like weeks and also a lot of money, right? So for us, it's like, it was such a straightforward thing talking to the NBA. It's like, well, you don't make any money on highlight footage. It's only just brand exposure, like. So the problem that you have is, you have a fan base that watches, but you don't have information about them. You don't really know about the fans, and also like, there's basketball card collectors that aren't really watching the games. So how do we connect all these things to unify, and not only that, also generate revenue for the league, right? So I like to look at those creative solving, that I think combines all these different things. And a more closer one is what we're doing with Jeff Staple, right? With Stapleverse. And Stapleverse now has evolved into a digital fashion project, right? I mean, Jeff's been around. I mean, you guys have been around for a while too, but Jeff Staple's been around for 25 years, hundreds of collaborations, and now we're getting some of these brands asking about NFTs, right? And I think the problem we're trying to solve for Jeff Staple is how do we, leverage the power of collaborations where the brand and Staple can team up and create things where the community loves to flex in the outlet of a PFP, right? And how do we kind of maximize those channels? So I think it's centered around the core of what is the problem, who is the creator, who is the brand, what are they about, and what is the problem, and who are the users. And those are still the fundamentals, which I think a lot of projects, when they're pitching Web3, they get lost in like, hey, the NFT market's going to be $6 billion in 4 years. Look at the volume in OpenSea. They're using the very large, large macro data to prove that they should do what they do, but that's not actually zoomed into the problem of the project, right? I don't really like the term metaverse.
Right.
I think alternative to Web3, I hear a lot of pitches like, we're the metaverse for this,
yeah.
we're a metaverse company, or we're an avatar metaverse PFP company, right? And to me, the metaverse is like the internet, you know? Like, imagine you said, we just replace metaverse with internet. We're an internet company. Like, we believe in the internet. I agree. I mean, I believe in the internet too, but what is an internet company, right? And I think metaverse has now received a branding visual in most people's head as AR, VR. And the fact of the nature is that there's not many people hanging out in VR, or in AR, right? And so we're all like envisioning this future where we're all with goggles on, which is cool, but we're not there yet. And I like to, think about products that are like present day, human psychology. What do? You wake up, you brush your teeth. Okay. Like, that's what you do, right? And how do we aid that process? How do we don't try to, like, I don't think you're gonna wake up, put on a VR headset and brush your teeth. I mean, maybe in 50 years, right? But you're not there yet. And so I think a lot of the founders need to not leverage these little crutches that are metaverse and Web3, and just think about like human behavior. What do you do normally? You wear clothes every day? Cool. How do we take that process and actually make it better? And that's where I see there's nuggets of interesting ideas,
Yeah.
rather than we're a metaverse company.
Right, and that's what it's all about, right? Like with any tech, it's like, how do you make the tech disappear?
Yeah.
Right? Like with Web3, the problem is like this onboarding and this kind of like involved, intricate process where you need to have your passphrase recovery, and you keep your keys, and that's scary for someone to be like, if I lose this, like all my assets are gone forever. And I think that's like my interpretation of the metaverse is not in some other world, but that the metaverse is going to permeate within our lives, like you're saying, and kind of permeate into our physical. So, like, physical is not going away,
Yeah.
right? Like brick and mortar retail, like those experiences that you can't get elsewhere, where you have to wake up, get out of bed, and go to a place in order to get that. That's not going away. And so to me, the metaverse and Web3 only enhances these things, right? Versus kind of taking us out of this world and being this escapist kind of concept where we don't want to be here anymore and we're trying to get into this metaverse. I think that there's some pessimists that might think that way, but people want to live here and now in the real world and not in the metaverse. So yeah, I think it's such an interesting topic for people to think about, and that's what I like to tell people personally when they talk about the metaverse, is that it's not a place in some digital space, and that might be part of it. The metaverse is tech, this new tech being permeated into every part of our lives without us even really noticing. I think that's important. I don't know like where I got that from, but I think it's like this this kind of like old, just like a technology concept and way of thinking that in order for technology to be its most useful, it needs to disappear. Like people can't realize that it's there. Like when you send an email, you're not thinking about like, the background of the code that goes into that and the servers. You're just typing it up and there's a clean platform. And it comes down to UX, right? And that comes down to what we keep talking about, which is cognition and psychology and how we think, how we interact, and all those things. So interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You got to bust your own concept to get to a better place, and that's just the reality of creativity and ideas. And that comes with humility too.
Absolutely.
So all these things come into play,
Yeah.
Yeah.